Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Duke Cameron.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to introduce our president. Thoralf M. Sundt III was born October 14, 1957 in Memphis, Tennessee. He was the third generation of Thoralf Sundts, preceded by a grandfather who was an architect and a father who was a West Point graduate and Korean War veteran. He was born during his father's second year of medical school at the University of Tennessee. His mother, Lois Baker Sundt, was a homemaker and a devoted mother to her three children, Laura, John, and Tor. From the beginning in Memphis, there were hopes that Tor would pursue a career in medicine, and he displayed interest quite early. Here, he is in his Ben Casey uniform, and he found his first patients in his sister Laura and the family dog Nina, who suffered a hind limb injury and had a secretive nighttime x-ray in his father's hospital. But Thor was also drawn in another direction, and that was a scientific investigation. Now, this theme of contested callings would recur throughout his career. In a kitchen experiment, this young scientist froze his own baby teeth in the family refrigerator and then thawed them later to see if they would grow. And though he still claims this was a study in biomechanical properties of enamel, his sibling investigators hold a different view, and unfortunately, the records are lost. He also displayed an early interest in patient safety, as presaged by his fourth grade certificate honoring his service to the safety patrol. Now, at age 12, Tor and his family moved to Rochester, Minnesota, where his father joined the staff of the Mayo Clinic, embarking on an illustrious and prolific 23-year career as a neurosurgeon. His father was a tirelessly and ferociously dedicated clinician who set high standards and expectations for hard work. His plans for Tor were clear, and when an acquaintance asked Tor, "What would you like to be when you grow up?" his father answered for him, "Any kind of surgeon he wants to be." Life in Rochester was good. At Mayo High School, Tor excelled in academics, science, and track. And here in his high school yearbook, he modestly described himself as a human being. Heading toward a career in science and research, he entered Princeton in 1975 and majored in biochemistry. He graduated summa cum laude with special honors for a research thesis in which he created monoclonal antibodies against rhodopsin, a component of retinal rods. He was the first at Princeton to create monoclonal antibodies. However, his father advised him to first obtain a medical degree. Tor matriculated at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, where the influence of John Cameron, Vincent Gott, and Bruce Reitz led to a decision to seek a surgical residency. While at Hopkins, he also famously led the student-run Pithotomy Club, an organization as old as the medical school itself and dedicated to collegiality among students and the merciless satire of prominent Hopkins faculty at their annual show. And here he is impersonating John Cameron. In 1984, he entered the MGH General Surgery Training Program under Dr. Gerald Austin. His residency was interrupted by a 2-year research fellowship at the NIH studying immune genetics under Dr. David Sachs. At that time, he also married Kathleen McDonald, an emergency room nurse at MGH, and they had a son, Hal, who is now a professor of rhetoric and composition at Oberlin College. As was common among general surgery residents in that era, Tor chose to continue training in cardiothoracic surgery. In 1991, he moved to Washington University for a 2-year clinical CT fellowship. There, the dream team of Cox, Ferguson, Kachukas, Spray, Cooper, and Patterson were perhaps the premier academic unit in the country and produced a lion's share of current surgical leaders in our specialty. Before joining the faculty at WashU, Tor spent a year and a half with Sir Magdi Yaqub at the Harefield Hospital in England, an experience he describes as pivotal and which set the stage for a career-long interest in complex adult cardiac surgery. Tor is pictured here with Mayo colleagues Kenton Zaire and Rocky Daly when Sir Magdi received the Lister Prize in 2015 in London. From 1994 to 2001, Tor established himself in St. Louis as a clinically skilled and academically prolific surgeon, and he rose in rank and stature, playing key roles in the development of their interdisciplinary aortic center and making significant contributions in a wide range of clinical areas, including transplantation, aortic and arrhythmia surgery, and valve repair. In 2001, he was recruited back to the Mayo Clinic, where he soon was promoted to full professor and vice chair in the Department of Surgery. His years at Mayo saw growth in his prominence as a thought leader in aortic surgery, patient safety, and human factors in surgical performance. In 2008, the AATS recognized his leadership and his outstanding organizational abilities by tapping him to become the secretary of our organization. And his 5 years in that position and this last year as president have been a seminal time for the AATS, as he led a major reorganization and revitalization of our association. In the most recent chapter in the Sundt history, he returned to Boston and to the MGH in 2011 as the chief of the Division of Cardiac Surgery and the Edward D. Churchill Professor of Surgery. His effect on the division there has been profound and invigorating. Tor is a private man with Midwestern reserve and modesty. He has interests in reading and gardening. His expansive garden in Rochester, Minnesota is now limited to a small porch in Beacon Hill, but is still flourishing under his care. We are grateful today that we are joined by Tor's mother, his Lois, his sister Laura, his brother John, and their partners, as well as his son Hal, of whom Tor is immensely proud. It has been a humbling privilege for me to introduce Tor. He is the consummate academic surgeon and leader. Tor is a man who may have been genetically and environmentally destined for excellence, but in the words of John Dark, he walked in his father's footsteps, but never in his shadow. I ask that you rise for our 97th president of the AATS, Thoralf M. Sundt III.
Thanks so much. This is intimidating. I wasn't scared until my brother pointed out that this was the first time I've ever spoken before my mother. But I guess she'll like it anyway. Thank you, Duke. As you can all see, I've led a life of extraordinary privilege, and no privilege has been greater than the opportunity to participate in this organization and to share with you a few moments today. My title is Ancora, Imparo, Always Learning. I think it's a particularly appropriate topic here in Boston, surrounded as we are by so many institutions of higher learning, all of which we're just tremendously proud of. Now, it's customary to begin with an homage to one's mentors, and the truth is I love this part. I think most surgeons do, perhaps because the defining event of our specialty is so personal and so human. We seek heroes, at least I do, and this is my opportunity to contribute to the oral history of our specialty and to familiarize some of the younger members of our specialty with some of my heroes. Now, I have to say that this comes at significant risk, as leaving out individuals who have been critical to my own success is inescapable. There have been so many. So I'm going to try to orient my comments here around lessons I've learned of particular value. In medical school, I witnessed the quiet power of a kind voice and a caring heart in commanding reverence and respect. Vincent Gott was not the stereotype I had expected of a cardiac surgeon. At MGH, Bill Daggett showed me the value of a systematic, thoughtful approach to every step of every procedure, and generously shared that knowledge with me. Kerry Akins, a fellow Minnesotan, showed me that an operation can be choreographed flawlessly from beginning to end. Kerry took a special interest in me as a resident and was welcoming to me on my return. Thank you, Bill and Kerry. Certainly my most formative time as a cardiac surgeon was in St. Louis. If you look closely at the faculty seated in the first row of this photograph, you'll see 5 presidents of this organization and 2 presidents of the STS. Tom Spray taught me the value of efficient decision-making and decisive action in the operating room. Alec Patterson, what it was to have a true mentor and friend. Joel Cooper, the excitement of solving an unsolvable problem. From Tom Ferguson, I learned the importance of a generous spirit. Tom, of course, was one of the few to serve as president of both organizations. Nick Kachukas taught me a solid, safe, patient-centered approach in the operating room. I believe I've patterned my own operative style more after Nick's than anyone else's. And from Jim Cox, the architect of this remarkable collection of talent, I learned the importance of building the team. I was fortunate to work for and then with Magdi Yacoub at Harefield. He is the archetype of the surgeon scientist, a role model not only for his professional accomplishments, but the universally high regard in which he is held by his trainees. From him I learned simplicity, confidence, and creativity. Consider the needs of the patient first is the North Star at Mayo Clinic. I learned that if you adhere to that simple rule, you can't go far off course. And being accepted as a colleague by this group of individuals was surely as high a compliment as a clinical surgeon can possibly receive. I'm also most grateful for the opportunity for my son to grow up in that idyllic Midwestern town. From David Torchiana, a most trusted advisor, I continue to learn the value of a deeply principled approach to leadership. Torch, more than anyone, gave me the opportunity to return to the MGH, a truly unique institution established as a hospital for the indigent over 200 years ago that maintains a commitment to care of the community. It is a privilege to work at the Massachusetts General Hospital. And of course, I learn every day from the remarkable individuals that make up our division of cardiac surgery at the MGH. Jim, I never thought I'd see a division to compare to the one that you assembled in St. Louis, but I was wrong, and here it is. And of course, I learn every day from all the other members of our team, too many to count. Together we accomplish remarkable things. But among all these role models and mentors, surely by far the most important was my father. He was a modest, committed, confident, and courageous surgeon. He taught me that it is a surgeon's responsibility to always exercise brutal honesty and ruthless self-reflection. That's what the ACGME calls practice-based learning. Given a somewhat melancholy personality at baseline, that's what my family calls hard to live with. Because our families surely pay a price when patients have problems, when bad things happen, if we're moody or self-absorbed. But confronting failure is a critical step in learning from our experience. And that's what I want to share with you today, what I've learned about the value of teams and the value of teamwork and the role that we play as leaders of those teams. Now, my argument is going to be based on what I've learned about complexity, about cognition, and about collective intelligence. I hope that you find it interesting. Perhaps you'll get some good book recommendations out of it. Learning is fundamental to us as humans. It's a basic need. For internally motivated people, Daniel Pink would argue it's part of what drives us, the drive to master a subject. We've all seen it. Individuals will take a job and they'll stay with you despite offers for more pay elsewhere if they're learning. Our universities virtually stand as monuments to learning, and we're willing to go deeply into debt for an education or for our children's education. Thanks, Mom. In fact, this event, this meeting, this association are really all about learning. It's my bet that's why you're sitting here today. I had a transformational experience at this meeting in 1999. It was in New Orleans. I was sitting in the back of the room, right over there. I heard a most remarkable paper presented. Marc de Laval talked about something that I knew was truly original, truly different. It was about factors that impact outcomes of congenital heart procedures, not patient anatomy or comorbidity or surgical technical factors, but other factors that impact individuals and team performance. He talked about human factors. My cognitive IgM converted to IgG in 2002 when de Laval delivered the honored guest lecture entitled Beyond Flatland. He refers to a remarkable book written over 100 years ago by an English schoolmaster, describing an encounter between the two-dimensional being a square and a three-dimensional being a sphere. The story dramatizes the impact of individual perspective on our interpretation of the world around us, and by implication, how our mental framework impacts our perceptions of the problems we face and the solutions that we see. It dramatizes the impact of adding a dimension to our understanding. Because you see, when I was an intern, I thought as an intern. I felt responsible for everything all the time. There were no excuses. I felt a profound sense of accountability. Work hard, and if bad things happened, just work harder. I was a good intern. And I learned to trust no one. It was an era in which if you made a mistake, you were likely to be asked, are you stupid or do you just not care? Well, I'm not sure what the right answer to that one is. Some of you might have been asked the same question. Or in the operating room, you might just hear from the attending across the table from you, I wish there were just two of me and none of you. Or, if I were an octopus, I would not need any of you. They're actually pretty good lines. It was a simple, deterministic, Newtonian world of individual performance. But as I've grown older, I've discovered that it's not so simple. Bad things still happen, despite hard work and the best of intentions, and I still make mistakes. De Laval helped me to understand why. He added a dimension to my understanding. You see, it turns out life is complicated. In fact, it's complex. And so began my journey out of Flatland. De Laval introduced us to Ilya Prigogine and the concepts of complexity and chaos. The more I learn about them, the more I see them around me all the time. And the more I am struck by their appearance in fields of study as disparate as economics and, yes, military strategy. Prigogine describes stable and unstable equilibria. In the moment of equilibrium, they look the same, but disturb them a bit and their difference reveals. In a stable system, small effects, small disturbances produce only small changes, and stable systems return themselves to normal. Unstable dynamical systems are sensitive to initial conditions, and small perturbations lead to dramatic nonlinear effects, and they do so in unpredictable ways. Will the ball roll to the right or the left? Unstable dynamical systems are much more common in the world around us. Living systems are unstable. They're what the new discipline of complexity science is all about. Away from reductionist approaches in favor of holistic perspectives. Now, the observation of nonlinearity isn't new at all. In fact, it's what's behind the old proverb, for the want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For the want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider. For want of a rider, the battle, and so on. It explains how a single shot fired in Sarajevo can trigger a global conflict costing millions of lives. Or how a simple act of personal dignity can help to catalyze social change. This is the world that I recognize. Not one of Newtonian predictability, but one of complexity and unpredictability. This world is dramatized in the movie The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, based on the story by F. Scott Fitzgerald of a man who grows younger rather than older. You may not have seen it. But his love interest, Daisy, F. Scott Fitzgerald seemed to like the name Daisy, is hit by a cab crossing the street, and it ends her ballet career. If only one thing had happened differently, if that shoelace hadn't broken, or that delivery truck hadn't moved moments earlier, or the package had been wrapped and ready because the girl hadn't broken up with her boyfriend, or that man had set the alarm and gotten up 5 minutes earlier, or the taxi driver hadn't stopped for a cup of coffee, or that woman had remembered her coat and gotten into an earlier cab. Daisy and her friend would have crossed the street and the taxi would have driven by, but life being what it is, a series of intersecting lives and incidents out of anyone's control, that taxi did not go by. That driver was momentarily distracted, and that taxi hit Daisy, and her leg was crushed. So now there you have it, a movie recommendation too. Small details can have big effects. The mathematics behind this was explored in the 1950s by Edward Lorenz at MIT as he modeled weather prediction using massive mainframe computers. He saw that tiny differences in input parameters resulted in wildly different outcomes. This is nonlinearity. It's the origin of the so-called butterfly effect, the idea that a tornado in Texas can be traced back to the flapping of a butterfly's wings in Brazil. It's a world in which equations as simple as force times equals mass times acceleration have given way to statistical mechanics and probability distributions. I have to admit I lament this a bit. I actually enjoyed freshman physics, but I dropped physical chemistry on the very first day when they showed me the Schrödinger equation. Jeffrey Kluger has provided what is, for me, a more accessible treatment of complexity, chaos, and most importantly, complex adaptive systems. Complex is not the same as complicated. A watch is complicated, but it's entirely predictable. Complexity is fundamentally different. It's the region between order and disorder that gives you complexity, according to Nobel laureate Murray Gell-Mann. It's the space in which interesting things happen. It's a world of random effects, and for me, most intriguingly, a world of self-organization. That's what's so interesting about complex adaptive systems. They're complex, composed of many diverse autonomous components. They're interdependent, linked as a system, and they adapt. This is the most interesting aspect. They change in response to the environment, and they change in response to each other. How they change depends critically on the nature of the interactions among those components. They're different than the sum of their parts, sometimes more, sometimes less, but complex systems demonstrate emergent properties, and unpredictably so. Could anyone really have predicted a victory 25 points down in the third quarter? I'm just going to leave that slide up there for a few minutes. D'Alessandro, that's 5 Super Bowls. 5, but who's counting? This unpredictability gives us more than entertainment, though. It also poses problems. Charles Perrow has coined the term normal accidents to convey the inevitability of systems failures in truly complex endeavors, everything from nuclear power to petrochemical plants. And he highlights the difficulty in diagnosing what went wrong when interactions are tightly coupled and complex in nature. Evidence 3 Mile Island. The implication of this is that we must think beyond error prevention because we simply can't prevent them all. This is why checklists alone won't solve all of our problems. The focus has to be on error management, to include error detection and error recovery. This is what high reliability organizations are all about. Organizations and industries that consistently function with a lower than expected number of accidents given their complexity. This is particularly important in high consequence industries. They're structured with intention to deal with the unexpected. Now, what was the point of all of this to us as surgeons? I don't claim to understand chaos theory deeply. Strange attractors and iterative maps, I have no doubt there are many in this room who understand this far better than I, but I'm intrigued by it, and I'm eager to learn. And I think it's relevant to us because it seems to me that in our world, our patients, the procedures we perform, and the institutions in which we perform them are increasingly complex. And certainly the consequences of failure are severe. What it suggests to me is that no matter how much we care, no matter how much we try, accidents, mistakes, mishaps will happen. Individual effort is not enough. Now, complexity is half of the problem. The other half of the problem, frankly, is us. As it turns out, our brains have evolved to deal with complexity. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about it in Blink. With a deluge of sensory input coming in from all around us, we have evolved subtle ways to gather, prioritize, analyze information rapidly against a background of experience nuanced by emotion. We make judgments constantly based on limited information in ways that we don't even understand. What is expertise? What is intuition? Is the Getty Koros genuine or is it fake? Gladwell calls it thin slicing. What's the patient's diagnosis? Are they sick? Do they need to go back to the operating room? My first exposure to these other modes of thinking was via neurobiologist Anthony Demacio. Based on studies of patients with brain injuries, he explored the influence of our limbic system, our emotional brains, on our decision making. How did you decide which seat to sit in today? And what will you pick from the lunch menu that you're thinking about right now this time of day? We may not be as coldly rational as we would like to think. Where do gut feelings come from? It turns out our amygdala is actually activated in circumstances of uncertainty. Gary Klein has studied what he calls naturalistic decision making. How do experts think? And where does their creativity come from? Based on pattern recognition and mental simulation, experts make fast judgments in contrast to novices who think slowly and algorithmically. We've all been amazed to see a master clinician make a complex diagnosis almost instantaneously. And yet even experts will sometimes make what we call rookie mistakes. The benefits of this kind of fast thinking are speed and efficiency. The risk is that we may be wrong. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky focused on exactly these pitfalls in fast thinking in work that ultimately led to a Nobel Prize and the establishment of the field of behavioral economics. Michael Lewis has recently written about this unique partnership between these two people. They identified systematic biases in our thinking that derive from our heuristics, our shortcuts, that we use every day to deal with the complex world around us. Our brains have evolved to play the odds, to seek out patterns. The results are some peculiarities, some quirks. Examples of biases are anchoring, the subtle impact a random number in the environment can have on our thinking. Representativeness, availability, framing, halo effects, all have an impact on our judgment and decision making when we're in fast thinking mode. But we have another mode of thinking as well, slow thinking. Our slow thinking brains are deliberative and logical. We use them for calculations, but they require concentration and energy, and frankly, most of us are lazy, and it's more fun to use your intuitive brain. You can feel it in action yourself. Quickly, 23 people are in the room. What's the likelihood that any two people have the same birthday? Our fast brain says it's unlikely, but if you do the math, the likelihood's 50%. Here's another. A baseball and a bat cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. Quickly, how much does the ball cost? Yeah, it doesn't cost 10 cents. Of course, it costs $1.05. But our fast brains jump to a dime. If you ask one group of individuals to quickly estimate this product and another to quickly estimate the reverse, the guesses for the first will systematically be higher than for the latter. Our slow brain tells us that they're the same, but our fast brains are anchored to the first number in the sequence. Now, come on, we're all serious people. How is all of this fun and games relevant to us? I would argue that we use our brains, our fast brains, a lot. We use them every day as clinicians. Fast thinking is particularly important when decisions must be made quickly on the basis of incomplete information. That sounds to me like what we as surgeons do all the time in the operating room. And in the clinic, it's old-fashioned clinical judgment. It's the foot of the bed test. It's where we feel comfortable as experts. It's where our emotional brains are happy, where we have that feeling of knowing. We're in a psychological state of flow, where we feel certain of ourselves. But that certainty also puts us at risk. You see, to consider the possibility that you're wrong requires that you shift back into your slow brain. It demands the energy and concentration to hold in your mind simultaneously at least two contrasting possibilities. Our fast brains just don't work that way. That's why time seems to slow down when we stop and question ourselves. See, even our language reflects that. Stop and question ourselves. So how can we know when we're wrong? What does it feel like to be wrong? The trouble is, it feels the same as being right up until the moment you discover the truth. Catherine Schultz has argued that there's no such thing as a feeling of being wrong, only a feeling of having been wrong. Her book, Being Wrong, needs to go on that list of books you're making. It's superb. Catch her TED Talk, too. Furthermore, we're at risk of exercising confirmation bias. It may be underappreciated, but it's not new. Francis Bacon wrote about it in The New Organon. Once a human intellect has adopted an opinion, it draws everything else in to confirm and support it, even if there are other and more stronger instances against it. As it turns out, there are data to show that experts particularly underestimate their uncertainty. This is the recognition of the fallibility of experts. Skepticism of received knowledge is the very foundation of the Enlightenment. In a crowd, confirmation bias becomes groupthink, and we end up with a disaster like the Bay of Pigs. Or in our own field, if I may, what I think is a rush to an overly aggressive approach to bicuspid aortopathy. Our remarkable resistance to recognizing that we can be so wrong, recognizing the role of random chance in our lives, the uncertainty and lack of control, leads us to stubbornly believe, yes, the stock market can be timed. This kind of thinking led to a global economic collapse from which we still have not recovered. We are fooled by randomness when we interpret the past, what's called the primitive logic fallacy, or affirming the consequent. The belief that it was all predictable if only we had connected the dots. But it wasn't. Complexity science tells us so. And the problem is worse, writes Taleb, when we try to predict the occurrence of black swans. The trouble is, you see, we don't know what we don't know. I'll resist the urge at this point to quote Donald Rumsfeld, and instead will recall David Foster Wallace's commencement speech. This is water. You see, two young fish are swimming along, and an older fish swims the other direction. It says to them, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" The two young fish swim along a little bit. One looks to the other and says, "What the hell is water?" Now, I don't know if I'm an old fish or a young fish, but it should come to you as no surprise by now that I believe the solution to our conundrum is teams. And I hope that what I've shared with you up to now has not been too much of a downer. Complexity and the challenges it presents, unpredictability, nonlinearity and emergence, the power but also the pitfalls of human cognition in dealing with the complexity that surrounds us, biases and being wrong. But surgeons are optimists and we're problem solvers. And I'm convinced the solutions we seek are within the very complexity we just described. The bit that I find most interesting about complex adaptive systems, their ability to self-organize. It explains the paradox of organized life forms in a universe of increasing entropy, the second law of thermodynamics. And complex adaptive systems are all around us. In fact, we're in one right now in this room. Multiple agents interacting with each other and being changed by those interactions. I hope learning. The solution is in teams, specifically highly functioning teams. Teams that are more than the sum of their parts. The antidote to groupthink is diversity of opinion. The defense against misperception is multiple perspectives. There is genuine value in high-functioning teams when addressing complex problems. And as leaders, all of us in this room can and do impact those teams. The keys to the teams are the agents, the members of the team, and how they interact, how they change, how they learn. So what do we actually know about teams? Well, During my time at Mayo, I was introduced to some of the business school principles. In particular, I remember learning about personality types and the importance of including different personality types on the team. I'm a task-oriented driver. I'm a complete loss in the emotionally sensitive, amiable quadrant. Given a tough decision that requires I make a decision, a choice, between sacrificing a relationship to accomplish a task or sacrifice the task to preserve the relationship, I prioritize the task. I'm not proud of it. I'm not ashamed of it. It's not inherently good or bad, right or wrong. It's just the way I'm built. And I've gotten things done. But I've paid a price for it when I've run roughshod over people. I've learned that by having relationship-oriented people around me, I can hold that tendency more in check. Now, rather than it driving me crazy at the beginning of a meeting when the amiables sit around and chat and talk about the weekend, I just relax because I don't have to talk. As it turns out, clear arguments, in fact mathematical arguments, can be made for the value of diversity on the team. I'm not going to digress at this point into social or political arguments, even though I think that they are important and particularly timely today. Instead, I'm going to focus on science, the science of cognitive diversity, and note in passing that cognitive diversity does track with identity diversity. The great mathematician and statistician Sir Francis Galton described the classic example of the wisdom of crowds. Attendees at a county fair were asked to guess the weight of a steer. They came within 1 pound. Remarkable. How can that be? Is it random chance? Well, Scott Page is a professor of complex systems at the University of Michigan. I picked up a video lecture course of his on my own, but I was reintroduced to him by my friend Rich Prager last year, and I was blown away by his mathematical arguments for the value of team diversity when facing complex problems. Now, I can't do full justice to his arguments, but I will try to tantalize you with just 2 examples, one related to prediction and the other to problem solving. Page shows us mathematically that crowd error is always less than the average error of the individual in the crowd. Not necessarily less than any particular individual, but more accurate than the average. More importantly, I think he shows that the diversity of the predictions, that is to say, the difference between each individual's estimate and the average, is always less than that of the average individual. Those differences are based on different mental models, on different experiences, resulting in different base rate biases. The important result is that, in the end, the accuracy of the crowd depends as much on the diversity of the predictions as it does on the accuracy of individual estimates. It's as important to have a diverse crowd as it is to have a smart one, at least when dealing with complex problems. Now that's about prediction. What about problem solving? This is a little harder to convey, but I think the graphic will help, and I have to ask everyone in the room to switch into slow thinking mode. And imagine that the universe of solutions to a particularly complex problem can be represented as a landscape, with the height of the peak representing the quality of the solution. Each individual working on solving the problem will use their own set of problem-solving tools to find their own best solution, their local optimum. Now, it may not be the best optimum of all, the global optimum, but it's theirs. Now, biologists use these sorts of figures to depict genetic fitness. A talented but homogeneous team with similar background, similar perspective, using similar problem-solving tools will likely come up with a similar solution. But a diverse team will come up with multiple different optima. one of which may be the true global optimum. So diversity increases the chances of finding the optimal solution. This, of course, is the most important lesson learned by Galton's cousin on the voyage of the Beagle. Darwin saw that natural selection exerted the pressure, but it was diversity that generated the options. So diversity is necessary, but is it sufficient? What's special about complex adaptive systems is the interaction piece, the ways they adapt. In biology, it's the power of genetic recombination. In this more general case, if the problem solvers interact productively with one another and use their tools in a complementary fashion, they'll move one another off their own individual local optimum and together find a global optimum that none could have discovered on their own. That's synergy. It's the difference between another useless administrative meeting and an exciting generative one during which people share opinions, argue with each other, change their views a bit, and come up with an entirely original idea. It's also what improvisational comedy is all about. It's the interaction that's the key. The difference between a diverse work group of individuals and an effective team is synergy. Shared goals, compelling vision, all that business school stuff. It's important, but there's more. And Amy Edmondson argues that the key to transforming a work group to a highly performing team is learning. She talks about teaming as a verb, not a noun. It's an active process that requires cognitive and, unfortunately for us, task-oriented personalities, affective skills. The aim is to create a learning organization, a culture that encourages learning through open interactions in a psychologically safe space, a space that's safe to share success and safe to share failure. Now, I'm not going to claim that failure is necessarily a good thing or a fun thing, but it sure is universal. Teddy Roosevelt talked about it at the Sorbonne. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, who errs, who comes up short again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. Now, I also want to clearly state that a psychologically safe space does not mean one that's free of accountability. The two are not incompatible. Accountability remains. In fact, accountability is essential to learning. But we need to overcome the shame. Are you stupid or do you just not care? And it doesn't mean a casual environment either. This is about collective performance. Neurobiologists are clear. Optimal learning requires an appropriate amount of arousal. When I was an intern, that meant fear. But too much fear quite literally shuts our learning down. Our primitive brain takes over and we focus on self-preservation. Interactions cease and the hope that anyone in the room will speak up is lost. Of course, learning is best when there's an emotional connection that enhances relevance. The old school cardiac surgeon who inspires fear is not only unpopular today, they are frankly counterproductive. They doom themselves and those around them to living the same frustrations day after day and year after year. How many times have we seen these individuals angry because the staff keeps making the same mistakes over and over? Why don't they learn? Perhaps the problem is us and not them. Bullying quite literally shuts down learning. But we can change that. It is entirely within our power to change the nature of the interactions we have within our teams, and we can do it today. No hospital committee or departmental approval is required. Now, you can't solve all of the problems, but you have an enormous impact on those around you. Everyone is watching you. I think Dad would say that it's our responsibility to optimize the performance of the team. It's our responsibility to create a culture of learning. And Dad would remind me that the foundation of leadership is respect. He who feels and hence manifests the respect that is due to others cannot fail to inspire in them regard for himself. And what about that brutal honesty? That too. Recognizing and sharing our failures with the team at mortality and morbidity conference or during a debriefing after a case. Learning is a process of action and reflection. We learn so much from failure. The mistakes that haunt me are the ones I didn't learn from. So confront failure, embrace it, wring every drop of learning out of it, and do it together with your team. Because learning is the glue that will bind you together and make you stronger. Because growing stronger is the point. Nicholas Taleb has coined the term antifragile. The opposite of fragile is not resilient. Resilience means returning to the former state. The opposite of being destroyed by failure is being made stronger by it, the way our muscles respond to exercise. That's what happened in this city only a few hundred yards from here on April 15th of 2013. 2 bombs were set off, 3 spectators were killed, and many, many spectators and runners lost legs. And the community coalesced to capture the perpetrators, and we took back our city. The following year, there were more runners than ever before and more spectators. And since then, many of those injured have come back to run again. This is anti-fragile. Isn't this what we want of our surgical teams? Remember that every time you walk in the operating room, every time you step inside the ICU, the step-down unit, you're leading the team. What kind of team will it be? You can choose. Will it be a safe learning environment in which diverse perspectives are encouraged and respected? Where you will solve problems together rather than alone? Will you lead with passion and intention? You see, what I learned as an intern was wrong. Trust your team. You need them. Your patients need them. So there you have it, Dr. Moon. Not a single mention of aviation, and I only used the word error a few times. We live in a complex world that's hard to understand. Random chance plays an enormous role, more than we'd like to recognize, and we're not in control of it. But we can cope, we can manage together, we can learn together. Now, you may think that I myself have just made the worst error of all and have forgotten to thank my family. But you see, what I've learned over time is that what the audience remembers best is the beginning and the end, and maybe not so much in the middle. So I saved the best for you. I've already talked about my father, but not my mother, the one who, as is the case in so many surgical families, raised the family almost single-handedly. Thanks for sitting with me in 3rd grade while I did my homework. My sister Laura, shown here with husband John, has always been my biggest fan. And my brother John, my most trusted friend. He's the good-looking one on the left. And I don't think we've changed a bit since this photograph. Thank you to Kathleen, who tolerated me in my peripatetic career with 6 moves, or was it 7, including one to another continent, making a cozy home for us each time without complaint. And more than that, thank you for raising such a beautiful son. Harold, you are my pride and joy. Thank you for your support. Years ago, I found this poem in my father's desk. My father, your grandfather. And surely it describes you. So with that, I'll close and make one final request, especially of all you task-oriented personalities in the room. Feeling and knowing are connected. Do something today that lets the people you love feel, not just know, but feel how much they mean to you. Thank you.